Okay, we will get started with our Bountiful City Council work session. And today on our agenda, we are grateful to have representatives here from UTA to help us walk through our 5-year service plan and the Davis Salt Lake City Connector. So we'll turn the time over to Trustee Beth Holbrook. I just, a personal point of privilege, I just have to say, you probably all know that Beth Holbrook was on the city council here for many years, so we want to welcome you home. And yeah, you're always welcome. We're glad that you're, now that you're with UTA, it's nice that you're so familiar with our area, because then when you're talking about these things, you know the roads, you know the things we're talking about because you drive them every day. So
Yes.
And I assume that you'll introduce your cohort as well.
Yes, I will. Thank you
Okay.
so much. And
Thank you.
good evening, everyone, mayor and council. I'm like, oh my gosh, it does feel so cool to be back here like this. I just love this. For the record, I'm Beth Holbrook. I'm the trustee for Utah Transit Authority. And I am here tonight to present information on our 5-year service plan, which is going to include our BRT. And then I have and it has a really long name right now, Davis Salt Lake Connector, and I do have handouts for everyone. With that, I'm going to introduce our newest member to the UTA team, and he's barely been a couple days, maybe not even a week yet. So this is, Chandler, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Yeah.
So my name's Chandler Butler. I've met some of you guys before in my previous role in Senator Romney's office working as the Northern Utah Director. So ran out of a job at the end of the year and was lucky enough to get hired on at UTA. So looking forward to interacting with you all as the government relations manager for cities and counties. So yeah, happy to be here.
And normally I would have him up here, but he doesn't quite know all the acronyms yet, and we're going to let him go ahead and just hang out and sit down. But we are excited to welcome him as well. We know how valuable it is to have all of the community input. It really does help us to have a better understanding of the needs of all the communities. And some of us, like some cities, like Bountiful, don't have as much growth per se, but it's the connectivity pieces that are really critical. So what I'd like to do now is to go ahead and go through our 5-year service plan. And the 5-year service plan is basically our service that is going to be enacted starting this year. And we have a new process. We used to have several different what we call change days. And now we are doing change days only one time a year. It's in April. So April of 2025 is when the first set of changes are going to occur. You will still hear the word change day every now and then. We're trying to get away from that, but that's for ski only. So nothing else other than ski. So obviously seasonal piece to that. So with that, next slide, please. Thank you. So, and I do have a tendency to get super wonky and talk in acronyms. So please interrupt me and ask questions. This is obviously our first year in our 5-year service plan. And as you can see, there's a lot of changes that we're going to be doing. And some of these are reflective of way back into COVID. I know I hate to say that. I mean, we've really moved on, but some of those routes were changed and modified. And so we're officially discontinuing some routes that are not giving us the service to our communities that we would want to do. And those are the route numbers. And for those of you who really like wonky, I'm happy to tell you what they are. But basically, I really wanted to focus on what we're doing in Davis County. So with that, next slide, please. Thank you.
Can I just, before you move?
Oh, sure.
Just a quick question. I'm assuming that these changes, these discontinuations are based on data.
Correct.
Okay. I knew that was the case, but I just wanted to.
No, and it's a great question. And just for context, a lot of the data that we capture is actually, we have sensors in each of our vehicles. It's from small paratransit all the way up through front runner. And so what that does is it does our counting for us so that we have accurate count totals or ridership totals so that we can submit it to the federal government. It's a real critical component when you are talking about federal funding. And so it is really key to make sure that we do that as effectively and efficiently as possible. For context, we just installed a whole new series of more accurate sensors. And part of that is sometimes, like, it's literally so wonky. I'll show you. If you go like this and you go, oh, whoops, I forgot something, you don't want to count it in a weird way. So that's how detailed it can get. So with that, this is April 2025 for Davis County. And there are two routes that go through Bountiful, the 470, which we're going to have some modifications on, and then the 455. The 455 is not going to have any significant changes for this context in 2025. So as you can see, we're modifying it specifically to the Layton Hills Mall area and some of those connections farther north. And a lot of the times, this is input that we get from our Davis County commissioners in this case, and they're like, well, we have a lot of businesses in the area of Layton Hills Mall, and we want to make sure that we're having better connectivity. And this is getting workers to where they need to go. It's getting people to where they want to enjoy things. A lot of times people, one of the areas for ski is our Layton Hills Mall location. And a lot of times they go right up to Snow Basin. There's one more stop after that. So it's a pretty quick access point if you're going to go skiing in that route. And as you can see, there are other elements to this that are going to be impacted. They're not going to impact Bountiful per se. So if the 470 is still the major north-south corridor piece, and that runs on Main Street, all the way from Ogden through to downtown Salt Lake City. And the 455, not it's going to change, Weber State all the way through to the University of Utah Research Park. Very, very popular routes, both of them. They average about 3,500 riders a day. And we anticipate that with future changes, it's going to even be more enhanced. So next slide, unless there's any questions. So let's see. Here's the other piece to the April 2025 for Davis County. We have a new route, the 417, and this route is Redwood Road. So as you can see, from the Woods Cross Front Runner Station all the way through Woods Cross, North Salt Lake, into Salt Lake City on Redwood Road. It's been a bit of a challenge because I don't know if you are aware of this, but that particular stretch of road, right as you pass by I-215, is single lane. So it can get a little challenging sometimes. But we know that there is a connectivity piece to that as Rose Park builds out and a lot of development and growth still happening in these areas on the west side. So we think that this is going to be really a value add. Next slide. And this is the 645, and there's a little piece of this that hits Davis County, and it is the Layton area, but most all of this is actually in Weber County. But it's that increased connectivity that is going to go from our Davis, Weber State campus. I apologize, I was accidentally referring to the Davis section. And that connectivity is a huge challenge for us that we want to increase the service to. For context, we have our OGX, which is our current BRT up in Ogden City, Bus Rapid Transit, and that goes from our front runner station to Weber State. But there is a huge amount of ridership heading north from Davis County to Weber State University. My daughter is one of them, and she has she takes the 455, and what this is going to do is increase that connectivity piece to get to Weber State. Next slide. So this is, I don't know where 27 went. That is interesting. I apologize. That could have been my error, so I'll make sure I get that updated. So this is 2028, and this is the 417 that I talked about with Redwood Road. That's going to happen at 2025. It's going to start. But we're also going to increase that connectivity and discontinue the Route 455, which you've just heard me say is a hugely popular route. That's not going to, none of these changes are going to happen until the Davis-Salt Lake connector is in place. So this is the anticipated start date for the Bus Rapid Transit Davis-Salt Lake connector. Oh, I need to find a shorter way to say that. And then the 455 will then end up in Farmington And it will continue to do that local route in the Farmington North area, still heading up to Weber State University from that location. And then Farmington South will become the Davis-Salt Lake connector. And these are some of the routes that are going to be modified as a result of that. And then we are going to be creating the 417 to have extra service that just services Bountiful City. So as you can see, and it goes all the way to, and I want to say that is Centerville, up onto Parrish and then back around. And that is to really just increase this local piece to that. Next slide. Here's another new route that we're going to create, what we're going to call it an inter-county route. That is a Salt Lake City Central Station all the way to the Woods Cross through State Capitol, Victory Road. So that is that wonky road that heads up to the Capitol. For those of you, Kate, who take that route, you are very familiar with this road. And so we're going to be increasing this local connectivity piece in lieu of having the 455. And again, the 455 will still exist, but this is the different iteration of that, and it's definitely more focused on the South Davis portions. And again, as you can see, network enhancements, part of the implementation of Davis-Salt Lake. Next slide. And I'm like, okay, good. And then the 470X is the Davis-Salt Lake connector, and we're putting the X on that because it's really not going to be a 470 number, but for now, purposes for us to understand, we're calling it the 470X. We typically name our BRTs, so you'll start to hear an acronym as we identify what that is going to look like. This is going to provide us, from Farmington to the University of Utah Research Park, 15-minute service all day long. And it is Front Runner Station from Farmington to Research Park along 3rd West into Salt Lake City. And that's going to be a key piece. Salt Lake City has done a massive amount of investment on their Second South area. For those of you who travel to the University of Utah, Second South is one of our major bus corridors. We call it an enhanced bus corridor because you will find access on a vehicle, on a bus, within like 3 minutes. There's about 6 different routes that go on there. Salt Lake City deliberately lowered the lane count to 1 lane for cars and 1 lane for dedicated bus, all along Second South. And that starts on 3rd West, and it goes all the way to the University of Utah. It is going to really continue to evolve that connection piece. And then the 470X, Davis-Salt Lake connector, is going to end up at Research Park. And for additional context, Salt Lake City is doing a massive redevelopment in that area to include housing in addition to the commercial that's located there. And we don't know exactly what that timeline is going to be. Obviously, that's a development scenario, but we do know that that is something that is going to really enhance the service along that route. And this is obviously going to become a location for the Olympics at some point as well. None of the projects that we are doing are specific to the Olympics, but it's definitely going to enhance all the service that we're going to need for the Olympics.
Mayor, can I ask a question of our trustee? My day job office happens to be on 2nd and Main in Salt Lake. So I've been familiar with some of the improvements that have been made there and the bus-only lanes. Do you think the planning for those bus-only lanes will only take place in Salt Lake, or do you imagine that there'll be similar road diet requests as this BRT route comes into Davis County of the Davis County cities?
That's a great question. Part of the investment that Salt Lake City did, and it was roughly $15 million, sorry if I slurred that, it's $15 million that they've invested right in that Second South corridor. And their goal is, as they continue to develop, part of what they are doing is they're looking at housing specific to that. And housing connectivity is a huge thing for Salt Lake City. So that's where their investment is. And as you know, there is a lot of housing discussion in general. Certainly the legislative session is knocking on the door, and that is also going to be a discussion for this particular session as well. Because they have invested in that corridor, they want to enhance and redevelop as much housing as they possibly can. In fact, you might be familiar with some of the development that they've done. There's a couple of commercial buildings that they're actually redeveloping into residential. There's one on South Temple, there's one on First South, and there's one on Second South. And then in addition to that, there is a huge development that is on Third South. It's actually a tower, and I want to say it's the Astra Tower. I could be wrong with the name, but that is actually a brand-new high-rise residential development that's scheduled to come on board like any moment. They're almost done. That's where Salt Lake City has been focusing. So it's a long way to get to your question. Part of the discussion is we're going to have an I-15 rebuild, right? So that is integrated into this, because right now, as you head south, you're west of the freeway on the frontage road, and as you head north, you're east of the freeway. So very disconnected, very challenging to do dedicated lanes. Not impossible. But I highlight that because that was a city investment that they chose to invest in. And as we look at some of these key pieces, we would love to see more dedicated bus lanes, but we recognize that some of these roads are, right now, it will become very congested, especially when they redo I-15, and you're going to be finding as many options to not take I-15 as possible. What that looks like in the future, though, is hard to say. I do think that if there is an opportunity, I think North Salt Lake would be an ideal scenario, at least for that piece of it, to have a dedicated lane. They have a very wide road. Highway 89 is very wide in that location. What does that look like north of 2600? I'm not sure. I think that you're balancing out this classic challenge. How do I deal with existing infrastructure, i.e. commercial buildings, residential, et cetera, versus getting people greater connectivity? And we think that north of 2600, that's possibly it's definitely a city decision, but what that looks like is going to depend on how you guys want to do that, and technically North Salt Lake as well on that Highway 89 piece further south. It is an investment that we think is worthwhile, but again, we know that the cities navigate that, and it's a UDOT discussion too. So UDOT right now is just doing their first dedicated bus lane route. It's 5600 West. And for any of you who drive that, it's not currently dedicated bus at all. It's a 2-lane road, north and south, and it's bifurcated. It's got a huge center lane. And what that's going to look like is they're going to create another lane for dedicated bus. And that is a requirement because they're doing Mountain View Corridor. Because they've already redone Bangor and they did not make a requirement of that, they were required to do this, which is add a dedicated bus lane. It's expensive. It's really going to depend on how we navigate it moving forward. So that's definitely the most non-answer answer I could give you.
Thank you, I appreciate it, though.
Can I ask a clarifying question? I think part of the question might be, Trustee, that as I understand it, the community connector does not have any dedicated lanes, so it's not technically a BRT anymore, right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. You're saying that if the city wanted to help pitch in and buy some right-of-way and things, there might be sections, but right now that's not part of the scope of the project.
That's exactly correct,
Okay.
yes. And like I said, if there is an intention to do that, just like Salt Lake City did, they intentionally decided to navigate, Second South was their corridor that they wanted to focus on. If a city decides to drive that as a discussion in terms of navigating that moving forward, that would definitely be a city decision. We would certainly participate and be as helpful as we could in terms of the operational aspects of that, but a city investment.
So the stations or the stops will be BRT-esque, if I remember right?
Yes.
Be a little enhanced, but otherwise the bus, which is an articulated bus, will be in the flow of traffic.
Yes, it's not going to be articulated, however.
It's not be
That's
articulated.
UVX, which is our older model, and that's a hybrid bus. And it's a long, complicated story, but basically we're focusing on the electric aspect for this particular route. And so due to a lot of things, certainly the manufacturing space in buses makes it very difficult to get anything untoward So they're doing your basic 40-foot bus in 3 different propulsion types: electric, CNG, and diesel. So, which is a whole nother topic, but basically it's all going to be electric. And as you know, I'm trying to coordinate a tour so that you can see our OGX BRT, which does have some dedicated lane, but does also ride in existing traffic. And then you can see how that works. And again, that is a frequency piece to a BRT that is going to stay with the Davis-Salt Lake connector. I would love to see some other changes at some point, but we really think that this is going to pick up so much ridership and the frequency that it will allow us to connect is going to actually add a lot of value to, especially North Salt Lake, and Bountiful, but even further north, even Centerville.
Maybe,
They will be excited.
And Farmington too. So Farmington's going to actually become a hub for us, a multimodal hub that it's not currently today. As I mentioned, the 470 is going to actually end in Farmington, and then the 400 and the 417, the new routes that I was talking about on those other slides, that's going to start in Farmington. So it's really going to create this connectivity piece for us that we think is going to enhance service here in South Davis. Sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
oh, yeah,
I apologize.
no. So for the Davis-Salt Lake City connector, what, is it just a matter of time? The dollars are committed, the plans are in place, or is there anything else that could perhaps deter these plans? Is this just yet to be, I mean, what's the certainty of this moving ahead as the presentation shows?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, the Davis-Salt Lake connector is in a very great position on the federal side. And for context, when we did the OGX, which I think is the most comparable minus the dedicated lanes to what we are going to have for Davis-Salt Lake connector, it was roughly a 60-40 model. So 60% was federal and 40% was local match. And we have been taking a lot of steps to coordinate and identify that local match piece. We have $18 million identified through TTIF, which, for those of you who want another acronym, is the Transportation Investment Fund. And that is a fund that is smaller than the TIF, which UDOT controls, but is growing. And there's a continued investment level in it. There's $45 million that gets put to that account every year. And those are solely dedicated to projects that are have a transit nexus. So it can be for multiple things, like if you're going to redo a bus stop, for instance, or whatever, you, as a city, can apply for TTIF funds as long as there's a transit nexus piece to that. In this project, we've applied for TTIF funds, and so we have $18 million right now. Salt Lake County, just to make sure I say that correctly, has identified funding for the local match for the Davis-Salt Lake connector, because their investment is increased connectivity throughout the county, and as it connects to multiple multimodal hubs for us, it's a real value add for them. Davis County has, we're going through the process with Davis County, and they have identified funds in their transportation fund to basically be also incorporated into that local match piece. And so we anticipate submitting a federal funding ask probably by July of this year. And given the ridership that we already have, given the local match and the commitment that we already have, we think that this is going to rise right to the top for the federal funding piece, which is a very challenging component right now because you also have federal discussions about debt and about all of these other components going into that. So how we navigate this, I think, is really critical, but we see this as being a real value for the federal government, and we have heard that they believe that as well. So, does that help?
Could I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
So, from the municipal city perspective, will there be an ask from the cities for funding on this? I mean,
Yeah, great question. So that is in part a Davis County question that I've been speaking with to the commissioners. And I don't know that it's 100% fleshed out, but I do know that Davis County is definitely committed to doing this, and they do have a transportation fund that could allow them to do that match. They might or might not come back to the cities. I cannot answer that question. That's not my decision. But I know that they are committed to having this as a service for the cities in South Davis. So at this stage, I know that they're committed to doing the local match piece for everyone involved. So again, Farmington, Centerville, Bountiful, North Salt Lake. Technically, Woods Cross and West Bountiful too will benefit just because of the increased frequency, but they're not going to actually have direct service in those cities. So,
And
it's a
our residents
question
are
to ask
paying
the
taxes to the county to
commissioners.
help fund things like that too, so. Thanks. Any other questions so far? Yes.
Okay, quick question about these routes that replace the 455. Just from the maps that you've shown, it looks like there is going to be a loss of some easternmost portions of what's going to be the prior 455. And there was something in the slides that said there will be an opportunity to use resources of the 455 to connect East Bench communities. And so I'm wondering, what does that look like, do you think? Because where I see the dotted lines of, loss of service, it's all kind of where the 455 was kind of zipping up and with these stops. Will that do you think there will be a replacement, or maybe I'm seeing the maps wrong?
No, that's a great question, and it is a great point. And just for context, currently South Davis also has on-demand. And on-demand is, just in a nutshell, is it's basically our service to connect to various stops, whether it's bus and or front runner in this case. And it is geo-fenced so that it is only South Davis, not including Farmington City. And the practicality of that is we didn't want a bunch of kids to take it to go to Lagoon. We have to be very careful. We want to make sure that we're serving the entire community. And so with these changes, though, we do think that either the on-demand can pick up some of the extra areas where there wouldn't be as much technical service based on the 455, or the lack of the 455, I should say. But we also know that there could be some other areas where we need to keep up, and that's going to be part of how we're going to look at not just our on-demand, which would be part of that, but also if we need to create a hyper-local route that would basically be making sure we're hitting, these key areas that are where people are going. We have identified the hospital always as a location that people are using it, and people, probably mostly workers, from a practical perspective, right, as they're trying to get to their locations where they work, and not so much people heading to the hospital. Not that doesn't happen, but if they are within the community, then that could be a potential shortage. But we think the on-demand can pick it up by adding more vans, and that's where we're going to kind of wait and see. And there is a certain level of fluidity as you get further out, even within the 5-year service plan, because there are things that can impact it. You certainly mentioned, like, for instance, a budgetary challenge, perhaps. Perhaps the federal government says to UTA, well, we think we can get it in the next year, right? So that can shift things around a little bit. And that has happened, no question. Based on everything that we're hearing, we don't see that, but we can't obviously guarantee. So there is a level of fluidity, but we think that we can hit all of these marks at the same time. And we had to make sure that we identify it budgetarily so that we can provide the operators, the maintenance, and all the other things that go with these increased services. So I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, Mayor, may I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure well, first of all, I'm really excited to go on our field trip. So hopefully that gets scheduled soon. But I think that'll give us a really good idea on the BRT and what it might look like coming here. So from what I understand, what you're saying is this 470X is going to be the BRT, but I guess maybe what I'm confused on is the route that's going to go up Main Street, that is proposed to go up Bountiful's Main Street. Mm-hmm. That is community connector, not BRT, or it is one and the same?
It's one and the same. And I apologize, there is a little bit of a confusion. The technical term is a connector, Because there's no dedicated lane. But structurally, it is a BRT to everything except dedicated lane.
Okay.
I hope that that makes sense, but it is kind of confusing, so I do apologize. And, excuse me, we just have it marked 470X because in our system, we use numbers. We use bus routes, and that's why we did that. But that's not what it's going to be called. So that's another little confusion. I'm sorry about that. But once we have a name, so for instance, our Ogden Express, so OGX is the Ogden Express, right? And then UVX, which is down in Utah County, is our Utah Valley Express. We're going to find a name for the Davis Salt Lake Connector so we don't have to have this really long name that's going to end in X. So
DSX sounds great.
I will remember that. We're going to get there. We're probably going to, within the next year-ish, identify an actual name moving forward because we have to start, obviously, ordering vehicles and getting all of those practical things done. So I hope that answers your question. It is a little bit wonky.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll let you continue. I think we kind of interrupted you, so we'll let you finish your
I think that there's
presentation.
only one other slide,
Okay.
unless I'm missing my guess, and, yeah, there we go. Oh, I might have another Q&A one, so I apologize. So this is, again, the 455, which we have already talked about, and you can articulate, basically, this is going to become the 470X, Davis Salt Lake Connector. I'm going to just say the whole thing, so it's less confusing. But it's basically the articulation that we just discussed. And again, with the 15-minute service, that I think is going to be a real value add for connectivity. There's a lot of riders, and one of the things that we've noticed in post-COVID is that ridership is not just morning and afternoon. We don't have what we would call a rush hour, as UDOT would oftentimes term that. We are seeing constant service throughout the day. We think that part of that is, hybrid work models. We think part of it is just the changing demographics of who is working and where people are connecting. And candidly, increased traffic on roads is a frustration for people, and so they look at different ways to do that. And then you add housing costs and transportation costs, which are very big right now, and that's kind of what we are seeing right now. And there we go. So again, the 470 and the 473, those are, for Davis County, it's a discontinued route, but it's not structurally discontinued as we head to Farmington, right? Again, Farmington is that multimodal city now for Frontrunner as well as other services. And that's just to create greater connectivity throughout all of our service, to maximize the use of our operators and our resources. So for instance, our bus storage facilities, the majority of them are in Salt Lake County. So it's easier for us to send buses up into Davis County. I told you I can get really wonky on this. But basically, that is going to be what we are going to be seeing in April of 2028. Go ahead. And that's my contact info. If you have any other questions, please feel free to call me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to go through this. I know that you had probably wondered why you hadn't heard about it in a while. And we're doing a lot of the final environmental and all the other things that we needed to do to submit this. So with that, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm just going to give you guys this really quick in case you want to study this at your leisure. So this is just the Davis Salt Lake Connector. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Such good information. Great to see you and great to welcome you to the team, Chandler. Glad that you're there with UTA and somebody else that we know there. So that's great. Thanks so much for the good information. Okay, and we understand if you need to slip out. So next on our work session is to look at the permeable parking surfaces changes that we're considering. So I'll hand it over to you, Francisco.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a continuation work session discussion that we had from that November 12th, 2024 meeting, where we led a discussion regarding paved parking surfaces. As you recall, City Engineer Lloyd indicated the use of gravel outlined the use of gravel for landscaping and general use. And I talked about during that day, I provided an overview of driveway parking and landscaping regulations found throughout the land use code, as all these regulations are interrelated. With that said, on that November 12th meeting, City Council showed interest in further exploring changes to the city code that would allow gravel parking areas in specific areas. At the time, we provided 5 different scenarios, and the majority of council opted to consider gravel parking behind the front yard setback and considering gravel parking 10 feet behind the front property line. We've prepared language that council can consider for future adoption. That's found on page 19 through 25 throughout the packets. And I've got this exhibit that would show you exactly what this would do. With that said, we're not ready to adopt anything, and the exhibits on pages 19 through 25 is just a preview of what might come depending on which scenario you select, in that the formal process requires that any changes to the land use code get reviewed and vetted by the Planning Commission. They hold a public hearing, they submit a recommendation, and then it comes to you as the legislative body for the final review, and whether it gets approved or not with any other modifications that you might have. With that said, from that discussion that we had in November, staff, both the engineering and the planning office, we truly agree that there is a clarification needed in the code, whether gravel is a suitable material or comparable material regarding to asphalt or concrete. And we've agreed with that with you, and you were vocal about that. The language that we provided tonight reflects at a 25-foot setback. It does not reflect at a 10 feet. However, that could easily be amended in the future, as we're not taking a final action today. Regarding the alternatives that were identified, staff, we do believe that the changes, which is a true change in policy, in that we have never legally allowed gravel as a comparable place for parking. And as we go through the process, and I'll show you in that I'm more of a graphic person, we truly believe that this will have an impact on our city's storm drain system. Lloyd indicated his concerns with that, and if we allowed this change, we do believe that it will require an added service of level from the city, from both the regulating part and also through the code enforcement efforts that we get from the city. So we do recognize that. Should council desire to move forward with the alternative, staff recommends utilizing the front yard setback line. And our only reason is because of the concerns that we have. The farther away that it is from the public right of way, hopefully the less constraints or it will have on our storm drain system. So from that point on, from that point, I'd like to go over to the lovely SketchUp drawing that I've got. Green means landscaping. It doesn't mean Kentucky bluegrass. It just means areas that shall be landscaped. This lot that I drew here in SketchUp is barely over the minimum lot size at 8,000 square feet. It does reflect some of these lines. And if I could toggle in, it does show the 8-foot side yard setback. It shows the 25-foot side yard setback. And as you recall, from the time that we spent in November, we did talk about the clear view area for the driveway as it's drafted here and here adjacent to both driveways. And it does show the required landscaping area. Again, it doesn't have to be grass, but it does have to be landscaped as a 5 foot into the yard, 5 foot from the property line, and then a 10-foot type of separation that is required between lots. So if we went ahead and followed what we've got here, it would allow this gray area in the back at 25 feet to be able to have gravel for parking purposes. So I hope that my SketchUp, it did take me a little bit to come up, does reflect what that we could consider. With that said, the code that we, I guess, pre-wrote, as we're not adopting it today, it was reviewed by myself, the city engineer, as well as the city attorney, and it solely depends on the new definition found on page 21, middle of the page. It's the triple X definition, permeable parking surface. So we created another defined term, and all the other changes or possible amendments reflect how the landscaping, the parking, and all the other adjacent type of regulations would affect the ability to park a vehicle over this permeable parking surface. We wrote the code so it would not be a gray area in terms of, is it landscaping or is it this permeable parking surface? We identified that we needed some sort of separation from one barrier to the other that could be as fancy as curbing to a plastic strip of land that simply allows us to delineate this is parking, this isn't landscaping, through the efforts that we've had throughout the state to save water and to allow more xeriscaping throughout the city. And we did, Lloyd and I did have an opportunity to clean up the code here and there. So some of these other smaller amendments on page 23 and 25 is just an opportunity to clean up the code. You don't necessarily need to focus on those tonight. We would simply like to, first of all, receive confirmation that this is truly what you want to do and move forward with this, as this is not an amendment submitted by the public. We are not entertaining a request by a property owner that has submitted an application to amend the code. Often that's how we change the code. This is a city-initiated land use code text amendment based on your request to review how we interpret gravel and what areas are allowed to be landscaped or not. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Lloyd is here, and so is Brad. But the main point today is this what you want to move forward? And if you do, are you okay with keeping it at 25 feet, or do you want to consider going into the 10-foot area instead, which would make it so you could have gravel as close as 10 feet away from that front property line?
Thanks for your work on this. I like how, if we did move ahead with this, I like how the driveway is still the way to enter the property, protecting things like curbs, things like landscaping. So, if we do go ahead and allow gravel, then there's still this space where residents need to enter the driveway at the correct place, and there's still driveway materials that are required that are hard surface, to kind of protect us from having, as few as possible remnants, from concrete or whatever it is, escaping out onto the road. So my question is a little different. I know that what you're looking for direction from us to know if we want to move ahead down this road, and we're talking about gravel, but is right now does our code allow parking in these areas as concrete right now?
It does. It would
Okay.
be this shade or color for graphic purposes.
Yeah.
There you go.
So-
The code already allows for this, and this lighter shade of gray could be asphalt or concrete.
So the code already allows for parking, and it would need to be concrete, though, the way that we interpret it right now, and also in the backyard.
Let's go to the backyard. In that, if you can see here, I've done a 50-50, and that the code indicates exactly that. The code says that 50% of the required rear yard shall be landscaped. So
Okay.
I provided here the worst-case scenario, in that this is 50-50. If that has to be landscaped, then this area could be anything else.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be landscaped. That's what our code says.
Thank you. So council, any questions for Francisco as we determine if we want to move forward?
And Mayor, could I
Yes.
add another component?
Yes.
And I don't want to take your time.
Yeah, no, great.
This is the exact reason why this area is green as landscaping, and the other one is permeable in terms of our code. Current code also indicates that side yards shall be limited to 50% landscaping. We have always interpreted that to be both side yards together. So if one is covered with a permeable material, then the other side shall be landscaped.
Thank you. What questions do we have?
Mayor, I do want to ask a couple of questions. First of all, that section on 21 that you have labeled, page 21, you have labeled XXX.
Triple X.
Yeah. I really appreciate the specification that it needs to be free of plants and organic material. I mean, it really does have to be a substantial surface that can support the weight of a vehicle and is not migrating all over the yard. Additionally with that, I want to agree with our city engineer that this could pose hardship on our storm drain system. This could also relieve our storm drain system as well from at least volume of flow. When we get sheet wash, when we get heavy rains or heavy runoff, this will, I think, help alleviate some of that, as long as we don't have the remaining runoff carrying pieces from this into the storm drain. I didn't read through this entire thing. I'm confessing that now. Does it say somewhere that the parking area needs to be accessed from a paved surface?
It does.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing, I thought that when we left our last meeting, and I could be wrong, I often am, I thought that the not unanimous opinion of the council, but the majority of the opinion of the council was that 10 feet behind the back of the sidewalk was the recommended or preferred depth by the council. So that would be my recommendation, is we change that 25 to 10, make sure that it's accessed from a paved surface, make sure that it is a real parkable substance and structure, and that it's not full of weeds and organic debris.
I like everything you said. I do prefer, except for that, I do prefer 25 feet, just because our staff is recommending this because I think 10 is really close to the street, and I think that it could be easy for people to just kind of roll over a curb there, and I think 25 feet just gives it a little more delineation and also a little more separation for the materials to not come out onto the road and become storm drain fillers. But anyway, I'd love to hear from the rest of the council.
Does that, and I also prefer 10 feet. Thank you.
Okay, rest of the council? Yeah, please.
Quick comment. As I listen to Councilman Higginson, I worked on the definition of permeable parking surface. Another one of the questions I would like to get your guys' direction on, if this is the direction you go, is the size of rock, sand, or gravel that we allow. In this definition, I went with sand, which is obviously very small, to gravel. Different cities have different regulations on this that allow it. Some will say 3/4 inch, half inch, full inch. So if we could just get, once we get, or if the council could just be thinking about what direction they would like us to go, if we go down that road, on how big we want the rocks or sand to be.
Great.
Could you go through this same example, Francisco, but if this house is on a corner lot?
Yeah, well, it gets a little complicated based on our current code and restrictions, limitations regarding the front yard setback and what our code identifies as the street side, which one is 25, the other one's 20, but it gets a little bit more complicated with spacing requirements and other regulations that you have placed. I wish that I would have provided also a corner lot exhibit that would reflect this. On the fly, it would be as if either the 10 feet or the standard setback, whether that's 25 or 20, it would still apply.
So,
The street side was the side that the garage is
Sure.
on.
yeah, pretend that that's 20 feet right there instead of 8.
If we
Okay.
pretend that's 20 feet, and this is the right-of-way where the bucket is, we would not be able, as proposed, we wouldn't allow gravel on that. area adjacent, on that street side area adjacent to the road.
So if they could, on the non-garage side, under either the 10 or the 25 setback, they could do it on the non-street side of this house, which we would say would be the non-garage side.
Over here.
But, yes, over there where your
They-
bucket is.
Yes,
But they could not on the side where the garage is if that's where the street was.
correct. And of course, they could do it once they're no longer within the setback area. Once they're in what we call the building envelope or the building pad, which is where the house is, anywhere where the house is, so it's lot minus setbacks, that could be gravel or any other comparable
It
material.
would need to include 10 or 25 feet of concrete as entrance. So if.
Correct,
if-
just like this, whether that's
Yes.
on the side.
So the part you've put in the backyard, if this was a corner lot, and they wanted to park an RV or trailer, there would need to be concrete poured and then gravel at 10 or 25 feet.
It would have to be accessed off of a concrete or asphalt surface.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're the ultimate legislators. We would not recommend gravel all the way to the front property line. We would say be very careful with that.
Mayor, may I? I would just like to add my voice to Councilmember Higginson. I believe that the 10-foot setback is appropriate, and with other guardrails in place that we have in our code and this additional cleanup that you've referenced, Francisco, with setbacks and curbing requirements, sizing that we'll be discussing. In most places in the city, we have an added buffer of sidewalk and park strip, although that's not a determining factor. But I also am moved by the fact that landscaping is still required, and we still have landscaping requirements, and that gravel would not be allowed to count toward a landscaping requirement. So I believe that this does reflect a positive move for residents. If we went to the 10-foot setback, allowing a little more flexibility and use of their property, enjoyment of their property, and I would support that for those reasons, the 10-foot setback.
Okay, so when we're talking about setbacks, we're talking about the size of the rock. I know our attorney asked us to deliberate that. I feel like obviously things like sand, is very small, and then if you get too big of rocks, then they're going to be able to fill up and clog the storm drains easier. Maybe bigger rock won't be as easy to be moved. Charles is nodding his head that if it's a bigger rock, then it's less likely to move, harder to move off the property. But any thoughts on setbacks, rock size, any other points on this ordinance?
Mayor, I think I would prefer to go with the staff recommendation, not of keeping it as it is, but of doing the further back, the front yard setback. I think it would look good. I think it would still provide some alternatives. And I think it would be less likely to cause the problems that we're talking about.
Same. The 10-foot setback is what I would go with as well.
You would like a 10-foot, not 25.
Correct.
Okay. What's your feeling on setbacks, Councilwoman Bradshaw?
I wouldn't change it at all. I would just clarify what's permeable or non-permeable, but the lesser of the objectionable would be 25 for me.
And what are your feelings, Council, about the rock size?
I'd like to get our city engineer's opinion on that. I know that on the city project that was done recently at the town square, decomposed granite was used, and also it is compacted in place so that it becomes a fairly durable surface and not necessarily subject to erosion like an uncompacted surface would be. But Lloyd, would you share with us?
Sure. I think one of the key components to a good durable parking surface is that the material is what we call poorly graded, meaning that it's of a various distribution of particle sizes. It's not all one size. And that would be one thing that I would recommend is that no matter the material, that it's made up of a variety of sizes, whether it's a crushed product or even something that's not as highly processed. But the decomposed granite is a great example of that in that it's not, its largest particle size is not very big. It may be like 3/8 of an inch, but it has a variety of particle sizes on down to sand. And when they are combined together, they lock together and they stay in place. I think that's a critical component to a good parking surface.
Is road base that kind of a product?
It is that kind of a product. It is a little less accepting of water because it has a clay content to it.
Wow,
So,
I didn't know that. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose, one of the purposes.
but it does take water. It will take some.
Is there a feeling on the council that we want to have kind of a limit the size? What do you recommend, Lloyd?
I think most people would avoid a larger size gravel, like a 2-inch gravel or something like that, because it's not going to be great to walk on. It's not going to be great to park on. It's going to want to move around. So 1.5 inch and smaller, I think those are fairly common items. As you get specifically below 1.5 inches, there's a lot of crushed product out there that would be suitable.
I'm curious, Brad had mentioned that in preparing for this, that staff had looked at a number of different cities that allow gravel permeable parking. What is kind of happening in other cities? What do we see? For size restrictions or requirements?
As far as restrictions or results? I worked in a city who brought this in, and it was a mixed bag. It did create more parking, especially for multi-generational families. It was also extremely hard to enforce. Concrete's really easy. Plants don't grow up through concrete. Mud doesn't get in concrete. We don't have a problem with it being too thin. We don't have a question of is that concrete or isn't landscaping. But it did create a very good, cheap option for families that were looking for additional parking. As far as the way they enforce it, Lloyd and I, as well as Francisco, have looked at it, and there really is no standard. Some cities will require it to be 3 inches deep and 1 inch in diameter. Other cities will require it, like Lloyd said, to be basically road-based, where we have gravel down to sand that would not be able to be measured. So to say that there's a city standard, I don't know if we can find one. One thing that is consistent is a hard barrier around the cities, around the gravel, and we did our best to match that in here, meaning that you couldn't just take, according to our code, you couldn't just take the very thin metal borders you see for landscaping borders or the plastic borders. It would have to be a thick border. Once again, that's not easily enforced once it's in, but that is pretty consistent around multiple cities. If that answers your question, council member?
Yeah, that's good additional context. I also appreciate Lloyd's contribution about staying underneath that 2-inch, 1.5 inch size. And I think, Brad, you touch on something that really informs my opinion on this, which is that it can be containable with appropriate curbing and barriers, and it is affordable, readily available, and containable in comparison to some other surfaces. So,
Well, so when we talk about permeable, we're talking about things like rock, we're talking about things like bark or like pavers or, no, not bark. No organic material. Okay, thanks. Okay, so just want to make sure that we understand direction for Francisco. So Councilman Higginson, Councilman Murray, Councilwoman Price-Hewish are all in favor of a 10-foot setback. So that's the majority. And then it looks like, do you have direction? I mean, at least something to work toward for
Absolutely.
the
No.
ordinance?
Well, I think we're 90% there. We'll move on with the planning commission, given this direction, go through that process, and then it'll come back to you for actual final vote.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll be right back with our regular city council meeting in just a minute. And I don't believe there's anyone here that is here for the purpose of offering our opening prayer for a city council meeting. Is that correct? Okay, just wanted to confirm that. We'll just be back in 2 minutes for our regular city council meeting.